The moment my husband Thorne mocked my family's simple wedding reception, calling it charmingly low budget while raising his champagne glass, I knew our marriage would never be the same. I smiled through tears as everyone stared, but what he didn't know was that I had access to something that would make him regret ever embarrassing me. My name is Veda, and this is how I taught my millionaire husband that money can't buy class or forgiveness. I still remember the day I met Thorne Blackwood. It wasn't at some fancy gala or high-end restaurant like you might expect. It was at a tech startup launch where my small catering company had been hired to provide the food. Back then, I was just trying to get my business off the ground, working 16-hour days and pouring everything I had into creating perfect food experiences. "The salmon tartlets are divine," a deep voice said behind me as I was rearranging a display. When I turned around, I nearly dropped the serving tray. Thorne Blackwood, yes, that Thorne Blackwood of Blackwood Tech, was standing there in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his dark hair slightly tousled in that deliberate way that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Thank you," I managed to reply, trying to maintain my professional composure despite the fact that the host of the event was actually talking to the caterer. "Would you like to try the mushroom arancini? They're my personal favorite." He smiled, that $1 million smile that would later appear in business magazines and tech blogs across the country. "I'd rather try taking you to dinner tomorrow night." Looking back, I should have recognized the red flags. The way he seemed almost amused by my little business, as he called it. How he insisted on picking me up in his Maserati rather than meeting at the restaurant. The subtle glance from the maitre d' when I walked in wearing what I thought was my nicest dress, one that probably cost less than Thorne's tie. But love, or what I thought was love, has a way of blinding you. Our whirlwind romance moved faster than I could have imagined. Within 6 months, Thorne had proposed with a ring that made my friends gasp and my mother Octavia purse her lips in that way she does when she's concerned but trying not to show it. "Veda, honey," she said when we were alone in her kitchen after announcing our engagement, "are you sure about this? You two come from very different worlds." I laughed it off. "That's what makes it exciting, Mom. Besides, Thorne appreciates that I'm not like the women he usually meets. He says I'm authentic. My father, Pax, a high school history teacher who'd spent his life instilling values of dignity and integrity in his students, was even more direct. Just make sure he loves you for who you are, not as some kind of novelty." At the time, I thought they were being old-fashioned, maybe even a little jealous of my happiness. Neil, I wish I'd listened more carefully. The wedding was exactly what you'd expect when a tech millionaire marries. Extravagant, meticulously planned, and featured in several digital lifestyle magazines. Thorne spared no expense, from flying in orchids from Thailand to hiring a Michelin-starred chef who sniffed dismissively at my suggestion of including my grandmother's lemon cake recipe in the dessert options. "Darling," Thorne had said, kissing my forehead in that patronizing way, "let's leave the catering to the professionals, shall we? Your little business is charming, but this is our wedding." I let it go. Just like I let it go when he suggested I upgrade my family's attire for the ceremony, offering to have his personal shopper find them more appropriate options. Just like I let it go when he referred to my father's heartfelt speech as refreshingly simple. After the wedding, I sold my catering business, at Thorne's suggestion, of course. "You don't need to work anymore," he'd said, as if my passion was just a way to pay bills rather than something that gave me purpose. "Besides, as my wife, you'll have social obligations that will take priority." Those social obligations turned out to be standing silently beside Thorne at industry events, making pleasant conversation with the wives of his business associates, and planning dinner parties where I was more prop than hostess. I became the perfect tech wife, with a perfect wardrobe and perfect smile, even as I felt myself disappearing a little more each day. 2 years into our marriage, my brother Dex called with excited news. He was engaged to his longtime girlfriend Freya, a kindergarten teacher he met while doing a fire safety presentation at her school. Dex had followed in our uncle's footsteps to become a firefighter, much to our parents' initial concern, but eventual immense pride. "We're keeping it simple," Dex explained over the phone. "Ceremony at the community garden where we had our first real date, reception in Mom and Dad's backyard. Nothing fancy, just meaningful." "That sounds perfect for you too," I said, genuinely happy for my brother who had always valued substance over show. "I can't wait. Do you need any help with planning?" Thorne, who had been half listening to my call while scrolling through his phone, looked up with sudden interest. Your brother's finally proposing to the teacher? Tell him I'll help them find a decent venue. Your parents' backyard is hardly appropriate for a wedding. I covered the phone quickly. They want something small and personal, I whispered. Thorne rolled his eyes. Nobody actually wants small and personal. They just say that when they can't afford better. Before I could respond, he took the phone from my hand. Dex? Congratulations, man. Listen, as my gift to you two, let me upgrade this wedding. I know a fantastic resort in wine country. Exclusive, incredible views, top shelf everything. What do you say? The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Finally, Dex replied, his voice tight. That's really generous, Thorne, but Freya and I have our hearts set on something that reflects us. We appreciate the thought, though. After the call, Thorne couldn't understand why Dex had declined. Your brother's pride is going to make his bride suffer through a backyard wedding when I could give them a day to remember, he complained, pouring himself an expensive scotch from his collection. It's ridiculous. Not everyone measures the quality of experiences by their price tag, I countered, feeling a rare flicker of defiance. Thorne looked at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Don't be naive, Veda. Of course they do, whether they admit it or not. In the weeks leading up to Dex and Freya's wedding, tension between Thorne and me grew. He made little effort to hide his disdain for their choices, from the DIY invitations Freya had lovingly crafted to their decision to have friends provide the catering as wedding gifts. At least let me bring some proper champagne, Thorne insisted the night before we were set to fly out. I refuse to toast your brother's marriage with whatever bargain sparkling wine they're planning to serve. I was too tired to argue. Fine. Just please be respectful. This is their day, not a statement about their financial choices. Of course, he said, kissing me absently. I'm always respectful. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity. The community garden was in full bloom, creating a natural cathedral of flowers and greenery. Freya looked radiant in her mother's restored wedding dress, and my brother's face when he saw her walk down the petal-strewn path brought tears to my eyes. Thorne, however, spent most of the ceremony checking his watch and emails, only looking up to raise his eyebrows at me when one of Dex and Freya's friends sang a slightly off-key but heartfelt rendition of their favorite song. By the time we arrived at my parents' backyard for the reception, Thorne had already made 3 business calls and was in a foul mood. The final straw was apparently the plastic chairs decorated with hand-tied ribbons. I need a drink, he muttered, heading straight for the bar where he bypassed the signature cocktails Dex and Freya had created and asked for scotch, the good stuff, if you have any. I circulated through the reception, reconnecting with family members and childhood friends, introducing myself to Freya's relatives, and trying to keep one eye on Thorne, who was becoming louder with each drink. When he cornered my father by the gift table, I rushed over. Just saying, Pax, for what you spent on this backyard setup, you could have put a deposit on a real venue, Thorne was saying, gesturing with his glass. Seems wasteful. My father, ever diplomatic, forced a smile. We think it's perfect for Dex and Freya. Not everyone needs the best. Thorne finished for him. That's where I disagree. Families should have the best, especially when it's available to them. I slipped my arm through Thorne's. Let's get some food, honey. The appetizers look amazing. As I steered him toward the buffet, my mother intercepted us. Veda, there you are. Would you mind helping Freya with something in the house? She asked specifically for you. It was a rescue mission, and I knew it. Of course. Thorne, why don't you try these crab puffs? My friend Linnea made them. You remember? The one who took over my catering business? I escaped into the house, finding, not Freya, but my mother's oldest friend Willow, who engulfed me in a lavender-scented hug. Your mother thought you might need a breather, sweetheart. For 15 blissful minutes, I sat in my childhood kitchen with Willow, helping arrange dessert platters and soaking in her calming presence. When Dex poked his head in, his face lit up. There's my successful sister. Come on, we're about to do toast and I want you right up front. That's when everything fell apart. My Uncle Finn gave a beautiful toast about love and partnership. Freya's best friend shared adorable stories of how nervous Dex had been on their early dates. Then, in an unexpected turn, the microphone was passed to Thorne. As Veda's husband, I'd be honored to say a few words, he said, standing and straightening his tie. My stomach dropped. We hadn't discussed him giving a toast. Across the yard, I caught my mother's concerned glance. Thorne raised his glass, the special champagne he'd insisted on bringing, and smiled their camera-ready smile. To Dex and Freya, it's refreshing to attend a wedding that focuses on simplicity. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd. When Veda and I got married, we went all out, you all remember. But there's something charmingly authentic about today's celebration. It proves you don't need imported flowers or gourmet cuisine to make a statement. The silence was deafening. Beside me, Dex stiffened. This backyard affair, Thorne continued, either oblivious to or enjoying the growing tension, with its DIY decorations and buffet-style catering, reminds us that marriage isn't about the wedding itself, but about the commitment. Though, he added with a chuckle, I do hope your honeymoon plans are more ambitious than the rustic cabin I heard mentioned. Freya's eyes filled with tears. The cabin had been her grandparents', a special place from her childhood that Dex had spent months secretly renovating for their honeymoon. If not, Thorne raised his glass higher. Consider a proper getaway my gift to you both. Everyone deserves luxury at least once in their lives, even if they think they don't need it. My father's face fell as Thorne continued. It's refreshing to see people make do with what they have instead of living beyond their means. The silence was deafening. My mother squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, whispering, don't make a scene, not at Dex's wedding. I don't remember the rest of the toast. All I could focus on was Freya's trembling lip, Dex's clenched jaw, and the horrified expressions of our guest. When Thorne finally sat down looking pleased with himself, the damage was done. No one knew what to say. After an excruciating silence, my father stood, took the microphone, and with more grace than Thorne could ever hope to possess, redirected the evening. Let's invite our beautiful couple to the dance floor, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion I could see in his eyes. As Dex and Freya moved to the center of the yard for their first dance, Thorne leaned over to me. They should thank me. My honeymoon offer probably saved their marriage before it even started. In that moment, looking at his smug expression, I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, that would come later. No, what broke was the illusion I'd been carefully maintaining, that my husband respected me and my family, that our different backgrounds were charming rather than a source of contempt for him, that underneath his polished exterior was a man who saw value beyond price tags. What Thorne didn't know as he sat there sipping his expensive champagne and watching my brother dance with his bride was that his callous words had just set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately bring him to his knees. Because if there's one thing my middle-class upbringing had taught me, it was resilience and the uncompromising certainty that some things can't be bought or sold. Like dignity, like consequences, like the unforgettable lesson I was about to teach him. After Thorne's humiliating toast, the rest of the reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and awkward conversations. I spent most of it doing damage control, moving from guest to guest, trying to salvage what should have been my brother's perfect day. Every time I caught Dex's eye across the yard, the hurt and anger there made my stomach clench. Your husband is quite direct, Freya's mother said to me by the dessert table, her tone careful. He's had too much to drink, I replied automatically. The excuse felt hollow even as I said it. This wasn't about alcohol. This was who Thorne was when he let his guard down. As the evening wound down, I found Freya alone, sitting on the porch swing my father had built when we were kids. Her wedding dress was pulled around her, and she was staring at her hands. Freya, I said softly, sitting beside her. I'm so sorry about Thorne's toast. He had no right. Do you think we're making a mistake? She interrupted, her voice small. With the cabin, I mean? Maybe it is too simple for a honeymoon. The vulnerability in her question broke my heart. Absolutely not. That cabin is perfect because it's meaningful to you both. That's worth more than any luxury resort. She gave me a watery smile. Dex worked so hard on the renovations. He installed a new bathroom himself and rebuilt the entire deck overlooking the lake. He wanted it to be special for us. And it will be, I assured her, squeezing her hand. My brother loves you more than anything. Don't let Thorne's warped values taint that. Before she could respond, Dex appeared in the doorway. His bow tie was undone, and his expression was carefully neutral, but I knew my brother. Behind that composed exterior, he was furious. "Mom and Dad are saying goodbye to the last guests," he said. "They sent me to find you two." Freya stood and smoothed her dress. "I'll go help." She kissed Dex's cheek as she passed, leaving us alone. As soon as she was out of earshot, Dex turned to me. "What the hell, Veda?" "I know," I whispered, tears threatening. "I'm so sorry." "You know what Thorne said to Dad while you were in the house? He offered to invest in Dad's retirement because, and I quote, teaching doesn't exactly set you up for your golden years." Dex ran a hand through his hair. "Dad just stood there taking it because he didn't want to ruin our wedding." I closed my eyes, shame washing over me. "I'll talk to him." "Will you?" Dex challenged. "Because the sister I grew up with would never have let anyone talk to our family that way. Not even her husband." His words hit me like a physical blow. When had I become this person who stood silently while Thorne belittled everything and everyone I loved? "You're right," I said, meeting his gaze. "And I'm sorry it took this for me to see it." Dex's expression softened slightly. "This isn't about the money, Veda. You know that, right? None of us care that Thorne is rich. We care that he thinks it makes him better than us." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Dex hesitated. "Just be careful, okay? And remember who you are." That simple phrase, "remember who you are," echoed in my mind throughout the painfully silent drive back to the hotel. Thorne spent the first 20 minutes on a business call, speaking loudly about acquisition strategy as if the evening's events hadn't happened. When he finally hung up, I was staring out the window, watching my hometown's familiar street slip past. "Well, that was excruciating," he said, breaking the silence. "I hope your brother appreciates that we flew all the way out here for that." I tend to look at him, really look at him, perhaps for the first time since we'd met. The perfectly styled hair, the designer watch, the casual arrogance in the way he held himself. Had I ever actually known the man beneath all that careful packaging? "You humiliated my family tonight," I said quietly. Thorne rolled his eyes. "Don't be dramatic. I gave a toast and offered them a generous gift. If their pride was hurt, that's hardly my fault." "It wasn't generous, Thorne. It was condescending." "Condescending?" He laughed without humor. "I was doing them a favor. Your brother and his bride were embarrassing themselves with that backyard reception. I tried to help them save face." "They weren't embarrassed until you spoke," I said, my voice growing stronger. "That wedding was exactly what they wanted. It was beautiful and meaningful and full of love." Thorne gave me a pitying look that made my blood boil. "This is what happens when you spend too much time with your family, Veda. You start forgetting the standards you've grown accustomed to. After we get back to real life, you'll see I was right." We rode the rest of the way to the hotel in silence, the gulf between us widening with every passing mile. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling and wondering how I'd become so lost in Thorne's world that I'd forgotten my own. The next morning, Thorne left early for a business meeting. Apparently, he'd scheduled work during our family visit, another sign of how little he valued this trip. "We'll fly back tomorrow," he said, straightening his tie in the mirror. "I've already arranged for the jet. The sooner we get home, the sooner we can put this unfortunate weekend behind us." After he left, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, turning my wedding ring around my finger. The diamond caught the light, throwing prisms across the wall. It was beautiful, certainly, but suddenly it felt like a shackle rather than a symbol of love. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Breakfast at the house? Just us?" An hour later, I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table, the familiar scent of my father's blueberry pancakes filling the air. My mother poured coffee into my favorite childhood mug, the chipped one with faded stars that I'd painted at a pottery studio for my 10th birthday. Such a small thing, but it brought tears to my eyes. "Honey," my mother said, sitting across from me, "we need to talk about last night." "I'm so sorry," I began, but she held up her hand. "This isn't about apologies. This is about you." Her eyes, so like mine, searched my face. "Are you happy, Veda?" The simple question undid me. To my horror, I began to cry, Not delicate tears, but ugly, racking sobs that seemed to come from some deep, long-ignored part of me. My father immediately abandoned the pancakes to sit beside me, his arm around my shoulders. I don't know who I am anymore, I admitted when I could speak again. I've been playing a role for so long that I've forgotten how to be myself. My parents exchanged a look. What? I asked. My father cleared his throat. Your mother and I have been concerned for some time. You've changed since marrying Thorne, and not in the ways people naturally evolve. It's like you're diminished somehow. Smaller, my mother agreed. You second-guess yourself constantly. The Veda we raised was confident and knew her own mind. I thought I was being adaptable, I said, wiping my eyes. Compromising. Isn't that what you're supposed to do in a marriage? Compromise goes both ways, my father said gently. Has Thorne ever compromised for you? I thought about it, really thought, and couldn't come up with a single example. Thorne didn't compromise, he simply assumed everyone would conform to his preferences, his schedule, his vision of how things should be. I gave up my business for him, I said slowly, the realization hitting me anew. My friends, my independence. And what have I gotten in return? A bigger house? Fancier clothes? The privilege of being Thorne Blackwood's wife? My mother reached across the table to take my hand. Only you can decide what to do with this awareness, sweetheart. But know that whatever you choose, we're here for you. Always, my father added. No matter what. Their unconditional support, so different from Thorne's constant evaluation and judgment, was like oxygen after years of slowly suffocating. We spent the morning talking, really talking in a way we hadn't since before I met Thorne. I found myself sharing things I hadn't even admitted to myself. How lonely I was despite being surrounded by people at Thorne's events. How I missed the creative fulfillment of running my business. How Thorne subtly criticized my appearance, my opinions, my background until I began to do it for him. Classic emotional manipulation, my father said, his teacher voice emerging. He's isolated you from your support system and undermined your confidence so you're easier to control. Pax, my mother warned, but I shook my head. No, he's right. I just couldn't see it because it happened so gradually. I took a deep breath, but I'm seeing it now. As I drove back to the hotel, my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I needed to make changes, that much was certain. But I also knew confronting Thorne directly would be futile. He dismissed my concerns, charm me into doubting myself again, or simply overpower me with his absolute conviction that his way was the only way. I needed leverage. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop and began searching through the shared cloud storage where Thorne kept household documents, the only account he'd allowed me access to. Most of it was mundane, utility bills, household staff contracts, maintenance records for his collection of luxury cars. Nothing useful. Then my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Hello? Veda? It's Indigo Reynolds. Indigo was Thorne's business partner, the only person at his company who'd ever treated me like a person rather than an accessory. We'd spoken maybe a dozen times at corporate events, but I'd always sensed a genuine warmth from her that was rare in Thorne's circle. Indigo, hi, I said, surprised. How did you get my number? Thorne gave it to me as his emergency contact, she explained. Listen, is he with you? He's not answering his phone, and we have a situation at the office. No, he had meetings all day. Said something about courting new investors? There was a pause. That's not possible. We agreed to hold off on any investor meetings until after the quarterly report. She sighed. I'm sorry to bother you with this. I know you're visiting family. It's fine, I assured her. Is everything okay? You sound stressed. Another pause, longer this time. Can I trust you, Veda? I mean, really trust you? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I said simply. Things at Blackwood Tech aren't what they seem, Indigo said, her voice dropping. The latest product launch was a disaster. The specs Thorne promised weren't deliverable, and now investors are threatening to pull out. He's been selling off his personal assets to keep up appearances. That's probably what today's meeting is actually about. My mind raced. Thorne had been acting strange about money lately, vetoing a house renovation he previously approved, suggesting I pause my charitable donations, insisting on reviewing every household expense personally. I'd assumed it was just his controlling nature, but what if there was more to it? "Why are you telling me this?" I asked carefully. "Because I'm worried," Indigo admitted. "Thorne's making increasingly desperate decisions. Last week, he suggested using your former catering company as a vehicle for some creative accounting. When I pointed out that could expose you to legal risk, he said, and I quote, "Veda doesn't understand finances anyway. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her." The casual dismissal stung, but it wasn't surprising. What was alarming was the implication that Thorne would willingly put me in legal jeopardy to solve his problems. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "Thank you for the warning, Indigo." "There's more," she said quickly. "Check the documents from 6 months ago, the LLC restructuring. If I'm right, Thorne has already started using your business to launder money and dodge taxes. It would be in the April folder, probably buried under household expenses." After we hung up, I sat staring at my laptop screen, a cold clarity washing over me. If what Indigo said was true, Thorne hadn't just emotionally manipulated me, he potentially made me complicit in financial crimes. With new purpose, I dug deeper into the cloud storage, focusing on the April folder as Indigo had suggested. There, hidden among utility bills and landscaping invoices, I found it. Documentation of a complex restructuring of my old catering business, which I was supposedly no longer involved with, that now listed me as a silent partner with 51% ownership on paper, though operational control remained with the new owners. Further digging revealed a web of suspicious transactions, inflated invoices, payments to shell companies, international wire transfers to tax havens, all tied to the business that still bore my name, all potentially traceable back to me. As I stared at the evidence of Thorne's betrayal, something hardened inside me. The man who had mocked my family's financial irresponsibility had been committing fraud with my name attached, risking everything I'd built before him. I needed professional help. With shaking hands, I called my childhood friend Ria, now a successful corporate attorney. "I need to meet you," I said when she answered. "Today." And I need absolute confidentiality. "Veda?" Concern colored her voice. "What's wrong?" "I can't explain over the phone. But I'm in trouble, Ria. Big trouble." 2 hours later, sitting in a private room at Ria's law office, I watched her expression grow increasingly grave as she reviewed the documents I'd found. "This is serious," she said finally, looking up at me. "If these transactions are what they appear to be, you could be implicated in tax fraud, money laundering, and possibly securities violations." My breath caught, but I didn't know anything about this. I didn't sign, "Did you ever give Thorne power of attorney?" or sign a document giving him authority to act on your behalf in business matters. I thought back to the mountain of paperwork Thorne had me sign after we married. "I might have," I admitted. "He said it was just to simplify things since he handled all our finances." Ria's expression softened. "Veda, you have choices to make and not much time. If the authorities start investigating these transactions, your ignorance might not protect you. You need to decide what you're willing to do." "What are my options?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Option 1, confront Thorne. Demand he undo these transactions and remove your name from everything. Best case, he complies. Worst case, he denies everything and accelerates whatever he's planning, potentially leaving you holding the bag." I nodded. "Option 2? Gather evidence and go to the authorities yourself. You'd likely get immunity as a whistleblower, but I'd be turning in my husband," I finished. "Yes, and destroying your marriage in the process." I stared out the window at the town where I'd grown up, where people built lives on honesty and hard work rather than deception and shortcuts. Where my brother risked his life as a firefighter for modest pay because he believed in serving others. Where my father had taught generations of students the importance of integrity. Remember who you are. There's a third option, I said slowly, a plan taking shape in my mind. One where Thorne has a choice. He can make this right, or he can face the consequences. Ria leaned forward. "I'm listening." "I need more evidence first," I said, newfound determination strengthening my voice, "and I know exactly where to find it." As I left Ria's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Thorne. Meeting's running late. Don't wait up. We leave first thing tomorrow. Perfect. I had one night to gather what I needed, and then I would teach my millionaire husband a lesson he'd never forget. As soon as I returned to the hotel room, I began preparing for what might be the most important night of my life. I changed into the sleek black dress Thorne had bought me for corporate events, armor for the battlefield I was about to enter. My hands trembled slightly as I applied makeup, not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline. For the first time in years, I felt fully awake, fully present in my own life. I called Indigo. I need access to Thorne's office at Blackwood Tech tonight. That's a significant request, she said carefully. Security would alert him immediately. Not if you're with me, I countered. You're the co-founder. No one would question you working late. A pause. What exactly are you looking for, Veda? Proof. Before I make any moves, I need concrete evidence of what he's been doing. Enzo sighed. The branch office downtown has lower security than headquarters. I can get you in there at 8 p.m. There's a gap in the security patrol schedule, a quirk Thorne never fixed because he occasionally uses it himself for private meetings. The implication hung in the air, another betrayal to add to the growing list. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on what mattered now. I'll be there. As I gathered my purse, my phone lit up with a text from my brother Dex, just checking in. You okay? I hesitated before replying, working through some things. We'll call you tomorrow. Love you. His response came immediately. Whatever you need, I'm here. Love you too. The unwavering support of my family gave me strength as I headed downtown. Blackwood Tech's branch office occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper, its logo illuminated against the night sky like a beacon. Once, I'd felt pride seeing my husband's name displayed so prominently. Now I wondered how many corners had been cut, how many people had been stepped on to put it there. Indigo was waiting in the parking garage, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. Are you sure about this? She asked as we walked toward the private elevator. Once you start down this path. I'm sure, I said firmly. You use my business, my name, without my knowledge. Put me at risk while belittling my family for their financial irresponsibility. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. She nodded, swiping her access card. I've been wrestling with my conscience for months. Thorne and I built this company from nothing, but lately, he's made choices I can't defend. The elevator doors slid open. His office is on the top floor. I'll stand watch while you search. Thorne's office was exactly what you'd expect. Minimalist, expensive, designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a god's-eye perspective that perfectly encapsulated how he saw himself in relation to the world. I went straight to his computer, cursing silently when I found it password protected. Try Apex 2412, Indigo suggested from the doorway. It's his go-to. The numbers are his birthday backwards. The password worked, a small victory. I began systematically searching through his files, taking photos of incriminating documents with my phone. What I found turned my stomach. Not just the financial maneuvers involving my catering business, but evidence of multiple schemes going back years. Falsified performance reports. Investor funds diverted to personal accounts. Technical specifications exaggerated beyond what their products could actually deliver. He's been lying to everyone, I murmured, scrolling through email after damning email. The latest product failure was the tipping point, Indigo said, coming to look over my shoulder. We promised revolutionary battery technology, but the prototypes failed every test. Instead of admitting the setback to investors, Thorne doubled down, claiming successful trials and taking millions in additional funding. I photographed everything, ensuring each document was clear and legible. Then I spotted a folder labeled Contingency. Inside were transfer records to offshore accounts, property deeds in foreign countries, and, my heart stopped, divorce contingency plans. Thorne had already been preparing for our marriage to end. The documents outlined a strategy to protect his assets, minimize my settlement, and most chillingly, potentially implicate me in financial irregularities if I proved difficult. He was planning to use me as a scapegoat, I whispered, the full betrayal finally sinking in. If things fell apart, he'd let me take the fall. Indigo's face hardened. That's why I called you. I found fragments of that plan last week. I couldn't let it happen. Why are you helping me? I asked, turning to face her. You're risking everything, too. She smiled sadly. Because I remember who you were before Thorne. Before he turned you into an accessory rather than a partner. That woman deserves better. She checked her watch. We need to go. Security will be starting their round soon. As we prepared to leave, I paused, something catching my eye on Thorne's credenza, a framed photo of us from a charity gala, me smiling up at him adoringly while he gazed confidently at the camera. I picked it up, studying my own face, seeing the subtle anxiety in my eyes that I'd never noticed before. With a sudden impulse, I removed the photo from the frame and left it on his desk, a small but unmistakable message that something had changed. Back at the hotel, I carefully organized all the evidence I'd gathered, sending encrypted copies to both Rhea and a secure email account only I could access. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, considering my next move. Direct confrontation wouldn't work. Thorne would simply deny everything and accelerate his plans to insulate himself. I needed to catch him in a situation where he couldn't easily escape, or witnesses would make it impossible for him to dismiss my claims. I remembered the charity gala scheduled for next week, Blackwood Tech's annual fundraiser for children's STEM education. Thorne had been planning it for months, ensuring the guest list included every major investor and influential tech journalist. It was to be his showcase event, a display of success and generosity that would help shore up confidence in the company. It would be the perfect stage. I was deep in planning when I heard the hotel room door open. Quickly closing my laptop, I arranged my face into a neutral expression as Thorne entered. You're still up, he said, loosening his tie. He smelled of expensive scotch and subtle perfume that wasn't mine. Couldn't sleep, I replied, watching him carefully. It was like seeing a stranger, the familiar features rearranged into someone I'd never really known. Thorne moved to the minibar, pouring himself another drink. I secured an additional round of funding today. The Mercer Group is in for $50 million. He said it casually, as if he hadn't just lied to investors about technology that didn't work. That's impressive, I said, the words tasting bitter. What convinced them? He smirked. I showed them prototypes of the new batteries. Sometimes seeing is believing, even if what you're seeing isn't quite production ready. Fake demos, I translated flatly. Thorne rolled his eyes. Not fake. Aspirational. We'll get there eventually. The Mercer money ensures that. He took a long sip. This is business, Veda. You wouldn't understand. There it was again, that dismissal, that absolute certainty that I couldn't possibly comprehend his world. Once, it had made me doubt myself. Now it only strengthened my resolve. You're right, I said mildly. It's all very complex. He seemed pleased by my apparent submission, unaware of the storm building beneath my calm exterior. The jet is scheduled for 9 a.m. Be ready by 8. He headed for the bathroom. I need a shower. As soon as the bathroom door closed, I sent a text to Indigo, operation set for the gala. Need your help with final preparations. Her reply came seconds later. I'm in. Whatever it takes. The next morning, as our private jet soared back toward our life in California, I gazed out the window while Thorne worked on his laptop. Below us, the landscape of my childhood grew small and distant, but for the first time in years, I felt connected to it and to myself. I've been thinking about the gala, I said casually. I'd like to be more involved this year. Thorne glanced up, surprised. Really? You've never shown interest in the organizational side before. I think it's time I took on more responsibility, I replied with a small smile. After all, I am your wife. I should be a true partner in all aspects of our life. He looked pleased, exactly as I'd expected. Thorne loved the idea of showing me off, and my sudden interest in his business affairs would seem like validation rather than threat. Of course, he said magnanimously. I'll have my assistant add you to the planning committee. We're expecting record attendance this year. Every major player in the industry will be there. Perfect, I said, turning back to the window to hide the determination in my eyes. It's going to be an unforgettable evening. The week after returning home passed in a blur of careful preparation. On the surface, I played the role of devoted wife with renewed enthusiasm, which Thorne attributed to my coming to my senses after the wedding incident. In reality, I was meticulously building my case and assembling my allies. Rhea had reviewed all the evidence and confirmed my suspicions. Thorne had committed multiple financial crimes, using my business as one of his vehicles. "You have enough here to go to the SEC," she advised during a secure call. "But your plan to confront him first gives him a chance to make amends. It's more than he deserves." I'd also been in constant communication with Indigo, who had begun quietly documenting her own evidence of Thorne's misconduct. "The board needs to know," she told me during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop far from our usual haunts. "Most of them are decent people who believe in what we're building. They've been misled just like everyone else. Even my brother Dex had a role to play, though he didn't know the full scope of my plan yet. I'm staying in town a few extra days," he told me when we spoke. "Freya and I postponed the cabin trip. We're worried about you." "I'm handling it," I assured him. "But I might need your support at the gala on Saturday." "Just tell me when and where," he said without hesitation. "I'll be there." The night before the gala, I lay awake beside Thorne, mentally rehearsing every step of what was to come. There were risks, certainly. Thorne wouldn't go down without a fight. But for the first time since I'd met him, I felt the power balance shifting. Knowledge was my weapon, and truth my shield. I thought about what my father always told his history students: integrity isn't what you do when everyone's watching. It's what you do when no one is watching. Thorne had failed that test spectacularly. Now it was time for him to face the consequences. Morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect California day that usually made me grateful for our life here. Today, it felt like nature's spotlight on the drama about to unfold. Thorne was already gone when I woke, heading to the venue early to oversee final preparations. I took my time getting ready, choosing a striking emerald gown that Thorne had never seen before. It was bold, confident, utterly unlike the demure styles he typically selected for me. As my stylist worked on my hair, my phone buzzed with a text from Indigo. Everything in place. "Financial investigators are standing by discreetly. Board members all confirmed attendance." Another message followed moments later, this one from Rhea. Documents delivered to the designated board members' place settings. "Ready whenever you are." I took a deep breath, looking at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had stood silently beside Thorne at countless events before. This woman had fire in her eyes and purpose in her heart. "Ready for the finishing touches?" my stylist asked. I nodded, a small, determined smile playing on my lips. "Yes, it's time to complete the transformation." As my car pulled up to the gala venue, an exclusive art museum overlooking the Pacific, I saw Thorne waiting at the entrance, every inch a successful tech mogul in his tuxedo. His smile when he spotted me was genuine, perhaps the first real thing about him I'd seen in days. "You look stunning," he said, taking my hand as I stepped from the car. "That color is magnificent on you." "Thank you," I replied, accepting his arm. "I thought it was time for something different." He laughed. "I like this new assertive side of you. Much better than all that family drama last week." I just smiled, letting him think what he wanted. In a few hours, he would understand exactly how assertive I could be. We entered the museum's grand hall, transformed for the night into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the space, while waitstaff circulated with champagne and canapes. Every important name in tech was there, along with celebrities, politicians, and the elite of Silicon Valley society. As we made our circuit through the crowd, I spotted Indigo across the room, elegant in midnight blue. She caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Beside her stood several members of the Blackwood Tech Board, deep in conversation. Near the bar, I saw my brother Dex and Frel looking somewhat out of place but determined. They'd driven 6 hours to be here tonight. Dex raised his glass slightly when our eyes met, a silent pledge of support. Everything was in place. Everyone was here. All that remained was to wait for the perfect moment. Thorne's speech, scheduled for 9 p.m., when all eyes would be on him and escape would be impossible. As the evening progressed, I stayed close to Thorne, playing my part flawlessly. I laughed at the right moments, charmed the right people, and gave every appearance of being proud, supportive wife. All the while, my heart hammered in my chest, counting down the minutes. At 8:55, Thorne squeezed my hand. "Time to dazzle them," he whispered, pressing a kiss to my cheek before heading toward the small stage at the front of the hall. I watched him go, then glanced toward Indigo, who nodded again and began moving into position with the board members. On the opposite side of the room, two men in suits who hadn't been mingling, the financial investigators, subtly repositioned themselves near the exits. As Thorne took the stage to enthusiastic applause, I moved to stand directly in his line of sight. He flashed me that million-dollar smile, completely unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "Distinguished guests, valued investors, and friends," he began, his voice confident and commanding. "Welcome to Blackwood Tech's annual Futures Gala." I took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived. As Thorne continued his speech, I watched the room carefully. The board members were discreetly reviewing the documents that had been placed at their seats, evidence of financial fraud, falsified reports, and misappropriated investor funds. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock to carefully controlled anger. "This past year has been transformative for Blackwood Tech," Thorne was saying, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "Our revolutionary battery technology promises to reshape the energy landscape for generations to come." I almost admired his ability to lie so convincingly, to stand before a room of intelligent people and spin fiction as fact without the slightest tremor in his voice. Almost. "With your continued support and investment, we're not just changing the tech industry, we're changing the world." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Investors who had no idea their millions were funding Thorne's lavish lifestyle rather than actual functional technology. Journalists eager to report on the next big innovation. All of them taken in by the carefully crafted illusion of success. Thorne raised his champagne glass. "Before we continue the evening's festivities, I'd like to make a special announcement. As many of you know, Blackwood Tech has prided itself on innovation since day one. Tonight, I'm pleased to share that we've secured an unprecedented partnership with the Mercer Group that will accelerate our production timeline and expand our global reach." More applause. I saw Maxwell Mercer himself nodding appreciatively from his table near the front, completely unaware that the prototypes Thorne had shown him were non-functional shells. None of this would be possible without my incredible partner in business and in life, Thorne continued, extending his hand toward me. "Veda, darling, would you join me up here?" This wasn't part of the script. For a moment I hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected invitation. Then I composed myself and moved toward the stage, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. This deviation might actually work in my favor. As I climbed the steps to join Thorne, I caught Indigo's eye. She gave me a subtle nod, confirming that everything was still in place. I took Thorne's outstretched hand, feeling oddly detached from the gesture that had once made my heart race. "My wife has been my greatest supporter," Thorne told the crowd, his arm slipping around my waist in a possessive gesture. "Behind every great man, as they say." A smattering of polite laughter followed his antiquated sentiment. I forced a smile, even as anger flared inside me. Always positioned behind him, never beside him as an equal. "I've recently encouraged Veda to take a more active role in company affairs," he continued. "Her unique perspective and attention to detail will be invaluable as we move into this next phase of growth." The subtle condescension in his tone was lost on no one. Several women in the audience exchanged knowing glances. They'd heard men speak about their wives and female colleagues this way before. Thorne turned to me, that practiced smile firmly in place. "Would you like to say a few words, darling?" And just like that, he handed me exactly what I needed, a microphone and an audience. "I'd be delighted," I said, matching his smile with one of my own as I took the microphone from his hand. Our fingers brushed, and I saw momentary confusion flash across his face at my confidence. He'd expected demure gratitude, not assertiveness. I turned to face the crowd, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This event has always held special meaning for Blackwood Tech. It's where we showcase not just our innovations, but our values." Thorne shifted beside me, hearing something in my tone that made him uneasy. I continued before he could intervene. "Values like integrity, transparency, and ethical business practices. I let my gaze sweep across the room, making brief eye contact with the board members who were now watching me intently. These aren't just corporate buzzwords. They're principles that should guide every decision, every report, and every promise we make to investors and customers alike. Thorne's hand closed around my wrist, a warning disguised as an affectionate gesture. "What my wife is trying to say," he began, reaching for the microphone. I stepped away from his grasp, my movement fluid but deliberate. "What I'm saying, quite clearly, is that Blackwood Tech has fallen short of these values under current leadership." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Thorne's smile became fixed, his eyes darkening with anger and confusion. "Veda," he said through clenched teeth, "this isn't the time or place. It's exactly the time and place," I countered, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "When else should we discuss integrity than at an event celebrating the future? A future that's being built on lies." The murmur became a buzz of short conversations. I saw Indigo moving purposefully toward the stage, followed by several board members. The financial investigators by the door straightened, watching carefully. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, my voice strengthening, "I stand before you not just as Thorne Blackwood's wife, but as someone who has discovered disturbing evidence of financial misconduct, investor fraud, and deliberate misrepresentation of technological capabilities." Thorne lunged for the microphone, his composure finally cracking. "She's upset about a personal matter. The documents being reviewed by board members right now tell a different story," I said, smoothly sidestepping him. "They show a pattern of deception that has put this company, its employees, and its investors at risk. The battery technology that Mr. Blackwood just touted does not function as claimed. The production facilities he's promised do not exist, and the financial reports you've been provided have been systematically falsified." Chaos erupted in the hall. Investors rose from their seats, demanding answers. Journalists who had come to write puff pieces about charitable giving were suddenly scrambling to document a breaking scandal. Through it all, I remained calm, even as Thorne's face contorted with rage. "Security," he shouted, gesturing wildly. "Remove her from the stage." But the security team hesitated, looking toward the board members who were now assembling near the stage. Edwin Hartwell, the head of the board, shook his head slightly, a clear signal to stand down. Indigo took that moment to climb the stairs to the stage, positioning herself between Thorne and me. "The board has been briefed on these allegations," she announced, her voice cutting through the commotion. "And based on a preliminary review of the evidence, we find them credible enough to warrant immediate investigation." Thorne's expression shifted from rage to disbelief to something close to fear. "This is absurd. Indigo, what are you doing?" "The right thing," she replied simply. "Something Wei should have done months ago." Maxwell Mercer stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Is this true? Are the prototypes non-functional?" Before Thorne could respond, I answered, "The battery casing you were shown contains ordinary components with LED lights programmed to simulate charging. The revolutionary technology Mr. Blackwood described exists only in presentations, not in reality." "This is slander," Thorne sputtered, looking desperately around the room for allies and finding none. "My wife is having some kind of breakdown. These accusations are supported by extensive documentation," Edwin Hartwell interjected, his authoritative voice bringing some measure of order to the chaos. "The board is calling an emergency session, effective immediately. Mr. Blackwood will require your presence in the museum's conference room. The rest of you, please remain calm. Refreshments will continue to be served while we address this situation." Two of the financial investigators had made their way to the stage now, standing at the ready but not yet making any moves to detain Thorne. This was still a corporate matter for the moment. Thorne turned to me, his voice low and venomous. "You think you've won? You just destroyed everything, including yourself. Your name is on those companies too. You'll go down with me." I met his gaze steadily. "No, I won't. I've already been granted immunity as a whistleblower. The authorities have my full cooperation and statement detailing how you used my business without my knowledge and plan to make me the scapegoat if things went wrong." For the first time since I'd known him, Thorne Blackwood was speechless. The realization that I had outmaneuvered him, that his carefully constructed schemes had been dismantled by the wife he'd underestimated, seemed to physically deflate him. "You have a choice," I said, keeping my voice low enough that only those on stage could hear. Cooperate fully, make restitution to investors, and face the consequences of your actions with some measure of dignity, or fight, and I release the additional evidence I've secured, including your plans to flee the country with embezzled funds and frame me for your crimes. Edwin Hartwell approached, flanked by other board members. Mr. Blackwood, if you'll come with us now. Thorne looked from Edwin to me, his expression hardening into cold fury. This isn't over, he hissed before allowing himself to be escorted from the stage. As they led him away, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, relief, vindication, an unexpected wave of grief for the man I had thought I married, the life I had believed we were building together. Indigo squeezed my arm gently. Are you okay? I will be, I said, watching as Thorne disappeared through the door to the conference room, a fallen king surrounded by his former courtiers. The next few hours passed in a blur. The gala officially ended early, though many guests lingered, hungry for details of the scandal that had just unfolded before them. Journalists approached me for statements, which I declined with as much grace as I could muster. This wasn't about publicity, it was about justice. Dex and Freya found me sitting alone in a quiet corner of the now half-empty hall. Without a word, my brother wrapped me in a fierce hug. That, he said when he finally released me, was the most badass thing I've ever seen. Freya nodded in agreement. When you took that microphone, I've never been prouder to be related to you, even if it's just by marriage. I couldn't have done it without knowing you two were here, I admitted. Seeing you gave me strength. What happens now? Dex asked, his firefighter's practicality coming through. The board meets, authorities investigate, lawyers negotiate. I sighed, suddenly exhausted, and I figure out what's next for me. You could come stay with us for a while, Freya offered immediately. The cabin renovation is done. It's quite cozy. The thought of their simple, love-filled space brought tears to my eyes. I might take you up on that. I think I need to remember who I am again. It was nearly midnight when Indigo emerged from the conference room, looking drained but resolute. She sat beside me, loosening the clasp of her elegant heels. It's done, she said. Thorne has agreed to resign as CEO and cooperate with authorities in exchange for the possibility of reduced charges. The board has named me interim CEO while we sort through this mess. She shook her head. It's going to be a long road to rebuilding trust with investors and customers. I'm sorry, I said, surprising myself. I know you believed in the company's mission. I still do, Indigo replied firmly. The technology is possible. We were just brushing it, cutting corners, promising timelines we couldn't meet. With honest leadership and realistic expectations, Blackwood Tech could still do important work. She gave me a searching look. You could be part of that, you know. We could use someone with your integrity and business sense. I smiled but shook my head. I think I need to reclaim my own path first. But thank you for offering and for everything else. Where will you go tonight? She asked. Not back to the house, I hope? No, I confirmed. Dex and Freya are taking me to a hotel. Tomorrow I'll start figuring out my next steps. For what it's worth, Indigo said, rising to leave, I think you found yourself again tonight. The real Vanna was pretty impressive to watch. After she left, I sat alone for a few more minutes, gazing around the opulent hall that had been the stage for my marriage's final act. The crystal chandeliers, the marble floors, the priceless art on the walls, none of it seemed to gleam quite as brightly as it had hours before. I thought about Thorne, wondering if he was in custody yet or still negotiating with lawyers. Part of me had expected to feel triumph at his downfall, but instead, I felt something more complex, a somber satisfaction that justice was being served, mixed with sadness for the genuine potential that had been wasted by greed and deception. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, just heard from Dex. So proud of you, sweetheart. Call when you can. The simple message brought fresh tears to my eyes. My family had seen through Thorne from the beginning, not because they were judgmental about his wealth, but because they recognized that his values were fundamentally misaligned with mine. They had waited patiently for me to see it too, never giving up on the woman they knew I could be. As I gathered my things to leave, I caught my reflection in the decorative mirror, the emerald dress still elegant, my makeup slightly smudged, my eyes clear and focused. I barely recognized myself, and yet I had never looked more familiar. The woman in the mirror wasn't Thorne Blackwood's carefully curated wife anymore. She was simply Veda, daughter, sister, friend, and now her own champion. The road ahead would be complicated, with legal proceedings and divorce negotiations and the challenging work of rebuilding my life. But for the first time in years, that road was truly mine to travel. Outside the museum, Dex and Freya waited by their modest car, so out of place among the luxury vehicles still parked in the circular drive. As I walked toward them, I felt lighter with each step, the weight of pretense and compromise falling away behind me. "Ready?" Dex asked, opening the passenger door. I looked back once at the glittering museum on the hill, where I had finally found the courage to speak truth to power, even when that power belonged to my husband. "Yes," I said, sliding into the seat. "I'm ready." As we drove away from the gala and the shattered remains of my marriage, I didn't know exactly what my future held. But I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next would be authentic, meaningful, and true to the person I had rediscovered tonight, the person I had been all along beneath the designer clothes and practiced smiles. And that, I realized as the coastal highway stretched before us, was the most valuable lesson Thorne had taught me, though not in the way he had intended. True worth isn't measured in dollars, stock options, or social status. It's measured in integrity, courage, and the strength to stand up for yourself, especially when the person you're standing up to is someone you once loved. Some lessons come at a high price, but as my brother's car carried me toward whatever waited beyond the horizon, I knew this one had been worth every penny. 6 months after that fateful gala night, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, preparing food for a small dinner party. The space was modest but bright, with large windows overlooking a neighborhood park. No marble countertops or custom cabinets, just a functional, warm kitchen where I felt at home. My hands moved with practiced confidence, chopping vegetables and adjusting seasonings. After years of letting my culinary skills lie dormant, I had rediscovered the joy of cooking in recent months. Tonight was special, though. It would be the first time I'd gathered everyone who had helped me through the most difficult period of my life. The doorbell rang just as I was sliding a tray of appetizers into the oven. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to answer it, smiling at the sight of Dex and Freya on my doorstep. Freya's pregnancy was showing now, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "Something smells amazing," Dex said, hugging me before setting down a bottle of wine on the entry table. Freya embraced me next, her eyes bright. "The doctor said we're having a girl. We want to name her Veda, if that's okay with you." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Are you serious? I'd be honored." "We want her to have your strength," Dex explained, his voice gruff with emotion. "After watching how you handled everything these past months," I squeezed his hand. "Thank you. Both of you." My parents arrived next, bringing a homemade dessert and news from back home. They looked lighter somehow, the worry that had lined their faces during my marriage to Thorne now replaced with quiet pride. "The school board approved my curriculum proposal," my father announced as he hung up his coat. "Starting next fall, I'll be teaching a special course on ethical leadership to seniors." "Inspired by his daughter," my mother added, kissing my cheek, "though he'll never admit it." As we settled in the living room with drinks and appetizers, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Rhea, my attorney friend whose guidance had been invaluable, accompanied by Indigo, who looked different out of her corporate attire, more relaxed in jeans and a casual sweater. "Hope we're not late," Indigo said, offering a potted orchid. Traffic was terrible. "Perfect timing," I assured her. "How are things at the company?" In the months since Thorne's downfall, Blackwood Tech had undergone a dramatic transformation. Indigo's interim CEO position had recently been made permanent, and she'd been working tirelessly to rebuild the company's reputation and refocus its mission. "We're making real progress on the battery technology," she said as she accepted a glass of wine. "Turns out when you give engineers realistic timelines and honest feedback, they can actually innovate effectively." She smiled ruefully. "Who knew?" "And the investors?" I asked. "Most stayed after we restructured and showed them legitimate prototypes. Maxwell Mercer has been particularly supportive. Said he'd rather fund honest failures than dishonest successes." As we moved to the dining table, conversation flowed easily. So much had changed since that night at the gala, not just for me, but for everyone involved in Thorne's exposure. The legal proceedings were still ongoing, but the worst was behind us. "Have you heard anything about Thorne?" Freya asked hesitantly over the main course, voicing the question I knew everyone was curious about, but reluctant to ask. I nodded, setting down my fork. "The plea deal was finalized last week. He'll serve 3 years, with a possibility of early release for cooperation. Most of his assets have been liquidated to repay investors." "How do you feel about that?" my mother asked gently. It was a question I'd been asking myself daily. "Relieved," I said finally. "Not because I wanted him punished, but because there are consequences for his actions. That matters." "What about the divorce?" Rhea inquired. As my friend, not my lawyer, she could ask. "Final as of yesterday," I confirmed. I didn't take anything beyond what was legally mine before the marriage and compensation for the legal jeopardy he put me in. I smiled slightly. I think that surprised him more than anything, that I didn't try to take him for everything. "Because you never needed his money," my father said. "You needed your self-respect back. And you got it." After dinner, as everyone helped clear the table, Indigo pulled me aside. "I have some news I wanted to share in person. The board reviewed your whistleblower case again yesterday." My heart skipped. "And?" "They've approved a substantial compensation package, essentially a percentage of what your evidence helped recover for investors. It's significant." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter detailing the amount, enough to secure my financial future and then some. I stared at the number, momentarily speechless. "I don't know what to say," I managed finally. "Say you'll use it well," Indigo replied. "Unlike Thorne, you understand that money is just a tool, not a measure of worth." As we rejoined the others for dessert, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't experienced in years. The journey had been painful, but necessary, a reclamation of the self I had nearly lost. "I have an announcement," I said as my father poured coffee. "I've decided what I'm going to do next." All eyes turned to me expectantly. "I'm reopening my catering business," I continued, excitement building as I spoke the plan aloud. "But with a twist. It will be part business incubator, part culinary school, focused on helping women entrepreneurs build sustainable businesses." "That's perfect," Freya exclaimed. "Using your experience to help others." "There's more," I said, my voice steady with newfound purpose. "I'm using part of my settlement to create a legal fund for victims of financial abuse. Rhea has agreed to help structure it." My attorney friend nodded confirmation. "It's an overlooked form of domestic control. What Thorne did, isolating Veda financially, using her business without her knowledge, happens more often than people realize, just usually on a smaller scale. The fund will provide resources and representation for people trying to reclaim their financial independence," I explained, "so they don't have to choose between staying in damaging relationships or facing potential ruin." The approval and support around the table warmed me more than any luxury Thorne had ever provided. These were my people, the ones who valued me for who I was, not what I represented or could provide. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Dex lingered behind the others. When we were alone, he pulled me into another fierce hug. "Remember at my wedding," he said, "when I told you to remember who you are?" I nodded against his shoulder. "I was worried we lost you," he admitted. "That you'd become someone else permanently, someone who would stand silently while being disrespected." "You helped wake me up," I told him. That night was painful, but necessary. Without Thorne's public humiliation of our family, I might never have found the courage to look deeper. After everyone had gone, I stood on my small balcony, gazing at the park below, where a few evening joggers circled the path under golden streetlights. My thoughts drifted to Thorne, now facing the consequences of his actions in a minimum security prison. In our last conversation before the divorce was finalized, he'd been a shadow of his former confident self. "I still don't understand," he'd said through the prison phone. "You could have just left quietly with a settlement. Why did you have to destroy everything?" "Because it was built on lies," I'd replied simply. "And because you were willing to sacrifice me to save yourself. That's not love, Thorne. That's not even basic respect." He'd had no answer for that. I wondered sometimes if he ever truly understood what he'd lost, not the company or the money or the social status, but the chance at a genuine partnership with someone who had loved him before all those things mattered. Perhaps someday he would gain that clarity. Perhaps not. Either way, it was no longer my concern. My phone chimed with a text from my mother, made it home safe. So proud of you and your plans. Love you. Such a simple message, yet it contained everything that mattered: family, support, love without conditions or expectations. I texted back, love you too. Thanks for always seeing the real me, even when I couldn't. The night air had grown chilly, but I lingered a moment longer, savoring the quiet and the hard-won peace I found. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear yet, but for the first time in years, it was truly mine to choose. Not as Thorne Blackwood's wife, but as Veda, daughter, sister, friend, entrepreneur, advocate. I thought about the story I would someday tell my niece, the little Veda who would grow up in a home filled with love and respect. I would tell her about losing myself and finding my way back. About the difference between price and value. About standing up even when it's terrifying. Most importantly, I would tell her that true worth never depends on someone else's assessment. It lives in the courage to remain authentic, especially when it would be easier to compromise. As I finally turned to go inside, I smiled at the realization that my journey had come full circle. The humiliation Thorne had intended at my brother's wedding had ultimately been his undoing and my liberation. He had taught me an unforgettable lesson indeed, though not the one he'd planned. Some people spend their lives accumulating wealth only to discover too late that the richest people aren't those with the most money, but those with the most integrity. In losing everything that once seemed valuable, I had reclaimed something priceless myself, and that, I knew with absolute certainty, was worth more than all the millions in Thorne Blackwood's bank accounts.